All right, thank you, Simran, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us both yesterday as well as today. This is our 12th year of the GRC Summit. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome the entire room and some who are still coming in. It's a real pleasure to see so many familiar as well as new faces. In the room, we have Kavita from United, Bank United, Michael from BCBS Michigan, Gaurav from Templeton. We have David from Denata Emirates, Daniel from Eli Lilly, Linda from Bank of Montreal, Todd from Kroger, Lisa from NCUA, Donna from Fitch Ratings, Arindam from Bank OZK, Karen from CIBC, Prabha from TCS, and many others. I would strongly encourage all of you, if you haven't already, to interact with these leaders, to both share your insights on how you're going about your journey, but also get theirs, if you haven't already done that. It's nothing like having nearly 200 people and GRC leaders in one place to really feel the power of connection. The power of connection is really the theme of our summit this year, and not surprisingly, it's really about the power to transform our risk programs and tie in interconnected risks. It's the power to connect with evolving technologies, we heard a lot about that, to build resilience in your businesses. And most of all, the power to connect with each other and learn from our best practices and collaborative approaches, and this room and the community beyond that we serve, can help you with that. So let's really get started. A year ago, when we were in Miami at our GRC Summit, and many of you were there, I really talked about how we were living in absolutely unprecedented times and how the strongest leaders and leading companies had emerged from that. We were living through massive shocks, the aftermaths of COVID, global trade conflicts, wars, bank failures were rumbling through the US and other parts of Europe and the world, and driving inflation and high interest rates. Supply chains were being disrupted pretty rapidly, and headline cyber attacks and hacks and breaches like Colonial Pipeline and SolarWinds were shaking our infrastructure, critical infrastructure as well. Today, a year later, all the above are still pertinent, and a few more have come to the force. If you look at it, AI has taken center stage with generative AI dominating headlines across the news, across the world, across the Congress, all of that stuff. We've seen the Middle East conflict has added new dimensions. Misinformation campaigns, especially around elections, are creating uncertainties, and new methods of breaches and ransomware, like the Ascension Health, are on the rise. There are countries that are on the verge of collapse and going bankrupt, and that's causing social upheavals in many countries. Climate upheavals are also on the rise and more accelerated. The latest World Economic Forum report that just came out reveals a world plagued by a duo of dangerous crises, climate and conflict. These threats are set against a backdrop of rapidly changing technology and economic uncertainty. So it's not all doom, by the way. This has been happening, and we have to keep evolving as we go along. So really what we have to do is, how do you respond to interconnected and accelerating risk? I think we're all sure that change is going to be constant, it's not going to stop, and that tackling interconnected risks is going to be a very, very critical approach that we all have to take. In fact, when we founded MetricStream in the mid-2000s, it was really in the midst of massive systemic turmoil that was happening, and with a vision of really making multiple stripes of risk connected. We were slightly early for our times at that time, but that was the right answer then, and it's the right answer now, even more critical today, as risk and regulations are continuing to change and rapidly increase. Even if you look at the regulators, for example, even they are now pushing for integrated risk management, integrated GRC. Look at the regulations coming out of Europe that are stronger, and they're pushing more, like the PRA operational resilience. You look at DORA, you look at the EU Cyber Resiliency Act, the UK Corporate Governance Code, and many of the US regulations that are emerging are really guiding and forcing organizations to bring operations, cyber, third-party, continuity, compliance under one resilience umbrella. And this is not going to change. Just as an example of interconnectedness, if you look at a vulnerability in a seemingly insignificant IoT device, in a healthcare company or an energy company, which is powered by a third party, if a single hack in that insignificant device happens, it creates cyber risks, it creates operational disruptions, it creates financial losses, regulatory fines, and business impairment. The Ascension Health, if some of you followed the breach that had happened a few months ago, it shut down hospitals. It really shut down the hospitals. It stopped all ambulance services, other patient services, billing systems, insurance settlements, all at the same time because of one single breach. And some of these services are still not up after literally 3 months. So that's both the impact and the connectedness of risk that we see. So it's really time for us to all get connected. As we now look into the future, imagine, and some of you are already doing it, but because I work with you, imagine bringing your risk and resilient functions under one integrated view. It's tough, but doable. That constantly gets updated, with both internal and external conditions changing. Imagine all your regulations and regulatory changes are at one place with instant updates coming in. Imagine your cyber risk is available to you on a streaming basis with real-time intelligence and visibility into your entire internal and your third-party networks. Imagine if you had instant access to how market volatility and including macro and micro conditions can impact your business. And all of this can provide you a business intelligence and a decision intelligence framework to both prevent but also predict what and how you can make your decisions. That is where GRC and connected GRC is headed, looking at risk strategically and as a competitive advantage, a business driver, not just a cost driver. And that means not just managing risk, but also thriving on risk. And that's a journey that many of our customers, many of you are on. For us, there are 3 phases in the maturation phase that we're seeing in our customer base, in organizations, whether they are businesses, they are banks, they are regulatory agencies themselves who are trying to manage risk. The first really is about managing risk, as we call it, where the first step is to get risk compliance, audit, cyber, third-party programs through common taxonomies, libraries, leverage workflows, so that you can leverage the work that one group is doing, and really initiate some of those things. The second phase, where companies are heading to, and many have already headed to, is what we call embrace risk, where they get enterprise visibility by integrating your transactional systems, your vulnerability and threat systems through continuous monitoring, and also actively collecting observations from the front line. Remember, frontline is an extremely key component. Most organizations do not necessarily tap the front line for risk intelligence or compliance intelligence. And the last one, where you start to mature, and about 10% I would say of our customer base and who we talk to are in that phase, where they're taking the first steps towards not just managing or embracing, but really using risk to influence the top line. How do you use risk as a lever to influence your top line? And this is where risk and compliance professionals start to sit on the strategy table and define with the chief revenue officer, with the CEO, how business decisions could be made. I have great examples of risk officers actually that we've talked to that have really advised their businesses to take more risk versus lesser risk, okay, and to power up the top line or gain a certain competitive advantage in a particular territory, geography, or a product function. I've also had the privilege, and we all at MetricStream have the privilege of meeting and speaking with several hundred GRC executives around the world through the years, and what really keeps them up at night, and also what excites them. I'll just cover a few key trends across businesses, industries, geographies that we see dominating this year, and how our customers are rising to the challenge. So the first one really, and I've talked a little bit about this, is going from reactive to proactive. Reactive risk and compliance to proactive strategic risk and resilience. That's the first trend. The world of periodic risk assessments, annual audits, addressing risk in silos, looking at compliance as a checkbox exercise are giving way to the concept of resilience, which means you have to be proactive. Part of the reason, as I mentioned earlier, is also because the regulators have started to focus on this intensively. They're aiding in some ways the whole concept of integrated risk management and connected GRC. A couple of examples at the London Stock Exchange, which is one of the world's oldest stock exchanges and capital market solution provider. They had come to us a couple of years ago to strengthen their operational resilience framework, both guided by their internal board mandates, but also their regulatory requirements that was coming from the PRA and other agencies. Step one, their chief risk officer, they partnered with us to unify all areas of GRC. Whether it's risk, operational risk, their compliance program, policies, audit, third-party cyber. Second step, they applied the operational resilience framework to include their continuity programs so that they can see risks and react quickly in case of any business disruption. And just remember, London Stock Exchange is not just a stock exchange. They have massive businesses like Refinitiv, they've got capital market solutions, they've got insurance solutions, asset solutions, all of that. To tie that all in under one umbrella was a task in itself, and they've done a wonderful job with internal sponsorship. That's really resilience in action. Another example, in a very different world, I'll take is one of the largest global system integration and consulting firms, Infosys, more than 300,000 plus employees, managing 10,000 plus customer accounts and 60,000 projects at any point in time. Each of this with a different set of risks, people risk, nutrition risk, strategic risk, project risk, all of that stuff. So they have used this whole framework to ensure that they can measure the impact of all these risks and how they tie to strategic performance goals. And it is no easy feat given the quantification of the entire process and the programs that they run. The result for them has been a truly comprehensive picture of risk that enables executive teams and their board to make confident decisions that drive revenue, performance, and growth. One last example here on this I would give is one of the global 25 firms, Glencore, that is focused on commodities, mining, and energy, and they are a $250 billion revenue company and operating in multiple geographies, very contentious geographies as well. They had to respond to some significant corporate compliance and regulatory compliance incidents. As part of that, they not only fixed it, but they embarked on an enterprise risk management journey, to take a more proactive approach that encompasses their risk, compliance, audit, safety requirements to cater to the United Nations requirements as well as a number of regulatory requirements. This is a cultural transformation for them, and by the time this is fully rolled out, they'll have all of their entire 85,000 employees globally that are frontline involved with the risk process on a proactive basis. That's the piece I was talking about earlier, the embrace risk, where you start to get your frontline involved with the risk process, not just the second or third line function. So that's the whole concept of going from proactive to reactive, if you will. The second risk trend, and I'm picking one persona and one role here because we are seeing a significant kind of movement, is a changing role of the CISO. One of the major risks, as we all know, is cyber, data breaches, privacy, and this has majorly changed the role of the CISO that we are seeing. No longer is cyber a technical risk, it's a board level responsibility and business risk. As one example, the new SEC cybersecurity requirements and the NACD, which is the National Association of Corporate Directors, they are enforcing and guiding the boards to take direct accountability of cybersecurity. And that has resulted in cyber becoming one of the hottest boardroom topics. So what does it mean for CISOs? The role of CISOs is shifting from reporting to CIOs and CTOs, and now in many organizations it started to fold into the chief risk officer, the head of compliance or legal, depending on how the organizations are structured, and it's a very important move. Okay, and that today, if you look at it, has the CISOs now have to communicate in business terms to business leaders and senior leaders and boards in clear financial and actionable measures. Boards don't understand 2,000 vulnerabilities and 20,000 threats. They do understand, okay, this is the top 5 risks. This is the impact, this is the dollar value we have to spend to mitigate the risk, and this is the quantified amount. The stakes are high, and CISOs are being tasked both to protect but also to communicate in business language. And quantification of cyber risk is on the rise. CISOs are becoming risk professionals, like I said, versus security professionals, and that trend is going to continue in our opinion. As an example, at Franklin Templeton, And at Petronas, and we have people here from those teams, the CISO organizations are reporting to the Chief Operating Officer or the Chief Risk Officer in these cases. And as cyber continues to escalate, the role of the CISO is going to become more essential, more integrated, more central, and more business oriented. The third trend, and we all are exposed to this, is the rapidly exploding regulations. Compliance and regulations have become a little stale, a little boring about 5 years ago. It's keeping us on our toes now, day in and day out. This is a common trend. Regulations are continuing to speed up and evolve globally. Sometimes these regulations even conflict with each other, like privacy, the whole concept of nationalization, that's kind of rolling through some of the countries. They are conflicting views on how regulations need to be handled. According to Reuters, there are 250 regulatory changes every day, 250. And this is just in a couple of industries. As you see, DORA, the Digital Operational Resiliency Act in Germany that came out of Germany for the EU will go into effect in a few months in January of next year. And it's really aimed at looking at organizations looking at their entire program of anybody who's doing business in EU companies, of course, to safeguard their digital assets against cyber attacks. But guess what? It cuts across multiple themes of risk. In the US, the new cybersecurity requirements or rules that have come into effect, are really calling out for cyber readiness for public companies. It calls for immediate disclosure of cyber incidents, of board readiness, so that the impact can be shared, and also, other companies can start to avoid that through the centralized reporting function within the US SEC. AI is a huge focus for regulators, and as we have seen in continuous congressional hearings that we are getting from the big players who are dealing with AI, that's going to continue. The EU AI Act is in full force now, trying to balance the whole risk of AI. And these are just some examples. Every country, we travel to the Middle East, Asia Pacific, you go to even smaller countries that are just getting more and more governed, if you will. We are seeing the rise of regulatory pressure everywhere. One good thing is some of the regulators, we work with a lot of central banks, for example, they are also trying to tie innovation with regulations. The best example I can give you is the MAS. We just met with MAS a month ago, the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Remember, they're the central bank, the chief regulatory committee of the country, and they're also the chief innovation center. Their fintech event, they're sponsored and hosted by them, attracts 60,000 people from the world, is the largest fintech event in the world. Fantastic to see our regulators are interacting with businesses to not just fuel, but also regulate it, both at the same time. So these are just some of the examples, like I've said. The fourth one is our favorite one, the fourth trend. It's really the joy and the pain of AI. AI. Is there any other conversation that's happening out there since generative AI, ChatGPT made its debut about 1.5 years ago? And though AI isn't new, generative AI is a huge leap forward. And we've all seen the power of how AI can help us analyze large data sets, make decisions, write for us, paint for us, even make movies for us. Every industry is getting disrupted clearly. Now let's cover some fundamental points that we're hearing, from our customer base, from the analysts in the world of risk management. AI is not really about the hype and the cool things. It's really about the impact on top line, bottom line, human capital, and the ethics of AI. We've had the luxury of engaging hundreds of customers, experts, analysts, and there's a few things that are very, very critical. Some of them are here. Number one is really about data literacy and explainability. It's supremely important in your jobs and our jobs to ensure that we have data literacy, because it empowers individuals to understand and analyze with more accuracy. Without understanding data, the whole human augmentation does not work. The second piece, which is related, I've talked to a number of auditors and risk officers and posed the question at times that, do you think jobs will be replaced at scale? Some will be, but it's really not about replacing people. It's about augmenting people and processes. Human plus AI is the power equation. As an example, we've implemented some of these things where AI in our third-party application or products can analyze questionnaires and thousands of PDFs, huge data sets, which is a very manual, tedious task. Now, risk analysts can spend their time either making decisions or pouring through thousands of pages and trying to identify that one piece that can cause and extrapolate the risk that is there. This is a giant productivity add. AI does and can help you uncover hidden points, but you have to add the insights. The fourth and the final thing here is actually AI driving connected GRC. This is a very important one. I'm pretty sure that every one of you, okay, in any function that you're in the risk world, or the compliance world, or the audit world, is thematically trying to drive connected GRC. You know, what we are seeing is that AI can actually accelerate that, because if you do not have a connected strategy across the first, second, third line of defense on your data, on how AI will be leveraged, that's the first point that you have to do, to understand the process and have the process, have AI run through the entire process and the data across the enterprise to be able to leverage that. And I do feel that AI will actually trigger an acceleration of integrated and interconnected GRC. Last thing here that all of us know, one of the biggest areas of focus is clearly that's emerging is governing AI. Whether it's bias, whether it's ethics, whether it is data quality, whether it's data integrity, all of that, governing AI is suddenly, in the last 6 months, almost every customer of ours is talking about how we can help with that. It's really very similar, but much more chaotic, complicated than the classic model management, that many of the banks and even other organizations have followed. But this is going to come to the fore, so we have to all start thinking about, and this is going to come faster. We've had situations where technology investments have been blocked because there's the word AI, okay, in the vendor terminology, and there's suddenly an AI governance committee, okay, that doesn't know yet what to do and how to look at this. Regulators are breathing down the neck as well in terms of how they are going to look at explainability and all of that stuff. So that's really, governance is going to be a key function in the core of AI. All this is to say, AI is absolutely amazing, particularly generative AI, and probably the biggest tectonic shift since the internet happened. We just have to manage its risk carefully. But in this case, I think the joy will supersede the pain. The last trend, which is very personal, is really upskilling for success. This is extremely important as technology, as economics starts to shift fundamentally. All that we've talked about in the last 15 to 20 minutes is very important how GRC leaders have to expand their skill sets. There is a rapid evolution happening. Technologists and security professionals have to really understand businesses and the business. Business professionals have to understand technology. There's no option, because you're exposed to that day in, day out, and a very important part of your business is becoming digital, and therefore you have to understand the core of how technology operates. Every function is going through this evolution, and from our vantage point, we see the customers widening and deepening their skill sets. We are seeing, like I'll give you an example, one of our sponsors, he was the CISO of Morgan Stanley. He was appointed a couple of years ago as the operational risk head of Barclays. So that kind of transitions are happening, but for that, the skill sets, the learning, the whole curiosity around the entire business has to evolve. I had the opportunity, a wonderful opportunity last week in New York to meet with James Comey, the ex-FBI director. Okay, he was in a New York event full of bankers essentially, and GRC professionals and the bankers. And we talked a little bit about the evolving role of assurance functions. Prior to being at FBI, he was actually the head of audit and compliance at defense companies. So he was, really a third and second line function person, very articulate. And he gave a great analogy that I took back, of businesses and the world and the organizations really being a castle. All the business people are inside the castle, cooking and creating the businesses, creating growth. And then there are walls and the moat in front of the castle, and there are people on these walls that are guarding the castle. That's all of us here. People inside the castle, and I'm sure you face it, are often asking, what are these tens or hundreds or thousands of people behind the walls? What's their job? We are the ones who are creating business. And on the flip side, people on the walls are wondering what the people inside the castle are doing. Now, one of the advice and recommendations he gave to everybody in this changing, what I call upskilling, is to ensure that the way to create synergy between businesses and the second, first, third line of functions is really that many of the people inside the business do not see the thousands of arrows and the bullets that are coming at the castle. They don't know about it. So how do you bring the businesses to the walls and make them see at times how risk is being propagated around the organization, and sometimes, from within the organization, from far or near, how are these bullets coming? So make the attempt to bring these people to the walls, and for the people on the walls to go into the castle and see how the food is being cooked and how the business is being created. It's easy to say, not very easy to do, but that was a single recommendation, from him to how he has managed, even at FBI, how he was doing that to make people understand the risks, in the operating function. So there are big opportunities for professionals who are striving and want to go broad and deep.